second. Okay, we're live. So first off, we're a few minutes late, but bear with us. We were having a little pre-chat. Lily, tell me, share with everyone how we got to the title of Holistic Leadership, and that came from your inspiration about this talk today. So what were your kind of thoughts about that?
I think I always, as I said to you the first time we chatted, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. My dad, my great-granddad, my granddad, my dad, everybody in the family sort of runs businesses. And I think we grew up with a certain ethic in the house. And my dad was adamant that we had to kind of lead by example. And I think anybody from our generation would have been very much in tune to that, right? And I think my dad probably was the last generation that held a job for life. So being an entrepreneur was kind of really daring, and he always kind of brought the message home: you need to lead by example. But as I grew older and I moved away from the family business, I realized that in his head, motivation for employees was really important, but he was always thinking about motivation based on financial reward. And as I grew older, and as I opened my own business, I started kind of shedding all those layers of preconceived ideas of what running a business and leading people was all about. And I very quickly understood that money wasn't what was pushing me. And I also understood that money isn't always what pushes people. So understanding what inspires and motivates people to give 100% was really important. And we jokingly, Alan, my husband, and I were like, this is a very holistic approach to leading. And I did no research whatsoever until after you and I came up with these kind of holistic leadership. And I was like, oh my God, like this, nobody's inventing the wheel. This is actually there. Yeah. So it's really, I think it was interesting because I read afterwards a little bit about it, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm doing that. Oh, we're not doing that so well. So I think I think it's a really topical issue at the moment. Anybody in the hospitality industry is struggling to attract personnel and keep personnel. And I think it's the right time to sort of, put in practice some of these things that help us keep staff happy and motivated, and also keep ourselves happy and motivated.
I love that, because there's I don't know if you know about Dan Pink. He's an economist. He talks about, there's a lovely YouTube video for anyone listening as well, where it's he explains that the research tells us, at least the research at the point where he published this piece, was you need to give people enough money that they don't have to worry about money when they're at work. So when they're at work, they don't have to think about, are my bills paid, or just so people need enough money. But once they get there and they get to a level of comfort, the additional money you give them isn't necessarily a motivator. And in fact, sometimes it actually can be a demotivator and result in a lack of performance and productivity. So I think that's a really kind of interesting thing, this idea about like what motivates us, the way that, like, why people come to work or something. I was filling out a form there, and somebody said, do you expect your team to work harder than you? And it's always been a bugbear of mine, this idea that leading is somehow like sitting back and other people do the work. And while sometimes you have to sit back because you're not the best person to do the work, it's because someone else is better to do the work. And I think that this holistic idea of leadership has been around for a very long time, long before it was labeled or researched or any of these things. Like, people had a sense that when you have strong relationships, and we think about people as a full person, they do better themselves, but also they give more. And but it's interesting just how almost that's still being discussed like it's not new, but like oh, that's for something else. That's for a different type of it. That's for the business when we have loads of staff, when there's a really big operation, then we can think about that. But right now, at a startup or at a smaller business phase or at a tighter margins, it's not for that. And I know your business is like it's not a startup, I don't believe anymore, but you've gone from small to
very
bigger business.
And I think this is so relevant for small businesses because like I started my business like mostly everyone without a pile of cash, a dream, a credit card, and a lot of guts. And it was me for such a long time. And I had Alan, my husband, but he has a full-time job. So he's always been sort of like the helicopter view of the business. I bounce ideas off him. He loves kind of all the strategic end of the business. He's really good at it. But he has a full-time job, and we can't have, I've always been adamant that we can't have all our eggs in one basket. There has to be a secure income in the house, a bubble at the beginning. So when I started, we were both having full-time jobs, and I was doing these on the evenings. And then I kind of got it to a point where I thought, okay, what happens if I just go full time on it? And for the first probably 2-3 years of the business, I didn't actually pay myself, which is great, right? Any accountant would say to you, this is not a sustainable business. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs, we're not numbers people. We learn to be numbers people because you have to in the long term. But I'm a very creative individual, and I don't struggle with numbers, but I have to make myself look at the numbers, right? So initially I was fine investing. I always saw my time and my effort as an investment in the business. But all of that changed very quickly when I got my first employee. And it's everybody who's ever had the first employee knows how terrifying that is, because all of a sudden it's not just you and your dream. Somebody else depends on you. Their livelihood depends on you. And we were so lucky. We got first a part-timer. She's now with me full-time 7 years, and I adore her. We're very similar. When she came, Liz is her name. So when she came to us, she was all wrong on paper, but there was something about her that we just, we clicked. And she had a love for food. She had no experience in food, but she had this passion I could recognize for food, and I knew she was going to be right for the business. And I mean, she's my rock. I couldn't do what I do without her. But very quickly, it's very sobering knowing that you're now responsible for someone else's livelihood financially, but also you invest so much on training and getting them to know your business that you do want to be sure that they're happy and that they're with you for the long run. And I remember the only thing I knew when she came in on board was that I wanted her to I wanted to treat her the way I would like to be treated. And I worked for a long time before I had my business. I worked for someone else for a long time. I worked corporate for about 10 years, 11 years possibly. And then I did another 10 years in the third sector in a charity. And that taught me a lot about working with people and how important was motivating people, because once you're in a volunteer capacity, you can't force people to do anything. You can't throw money at them. You can't, you have to get to know the person and their motivations in order to get them to do stuff for you, because it's all voluntary. And I think those 10 years I spent working with volunteers were incredibly educational for me, because when I moved, I was coming from a very corporate background where it was all about money and profit. Then I went the complete opposite way, and it was all about the person. And then when I started being responsible for someone, I was lucky enough to be able to find a middle ground where I could, like you say, they're not working for free. You have to pay them. But also it gets to a point where, money isn't enough. And when, after a few years with Lise and I, got to know each other really well. She had two very young boys at the time. And for her, money, yes, once she got to a point where, money was fair, she wanted to spend time with her kids. And she was like, I don't want more money. I want time with my kids. So that was very easy for us to juggle and do stuff so that she could be happy. And then very quickly, the one and a half became two, and then three. And now we're a team of six, and we're pretty soon going to grow to a team of 12. And
Wow.
every time I have one new, it's terrifying. But I think experience comes from that. And what we learned with Lise, because Lise and I worked together for probably about 3 years before the second person, well, the third person, because I work full time in the business as well. Before the third person came on board, we had found this lovely rhythm where we understood how things work. And I think the experience with her was amazing because we got to know each other. We knew what ticked each other box, how to tick each other boxes, how to push each other's buttons. And we also kept ourselves fresh and learning. And I think that's also really important, in a small business when you can't progress up the ladder because, there's just not enough positions for people to go up. You have to allow them to go out. And for us, that's really important. So we get to know what their hobbies are, what they want to do. A lot of Lise came from a completely career change. So we were her career change. But then I have at the moment someone working in the warehouse who has almost finished their accounting exams. And so you kind of try and provide them with avenues to train and to grow within the business, but also when you are, completely out of room for them, you make sure that you're a brilliant step for them to step up and move to the next place, and I think first at the moment that's a big thing for us. We have two people that will be moving on soon. Someone's finishing their masters. I think in like 2 weeks they're handing in their dissertation.
Oh, wow.
And they're going to stay with us till September, but I'm absolutely sure they're going to be gone to great things. And I was there about 2 years ago pushing, you need to get this master's done. It's the way forward. You can't be stuck with me washing dishes at night. You need to do, you need to kind of invest in yourself. So she went and got her master's and she's almost there now. And I know in September she'll be gone, and she'll be a great story for us. We worked together 4 years, and I'm delighted. I'm going to miss her like hell, but I'm delighted we were a step for her to, to college and, do it in a safe environment and an environment that provided her with the time she needed to do assignments when she needed the time. So, like if your pockets aren't endless, these are the type of things that we find work really well. And we've created a small little team, but very well integrated. And it's just all based on, understanding what motivates each other.
It really reminds me, Lily. So, like, I don't know, 13 or 14 years ago, I was actually doing an internship because I didn't know where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. And the owner of this company, God love him, I think he was stuck trying to find one. So he just took me on. And I was meant to count stock. I'm very dyslexic. He was dyslexic. And one of the days, I was there a month or so, one of the days I'd counted the stock 3 different times and got wildly different information, wildly different. So I had to actually just go and say, I'm really bad at this. Like, I don't think I should be counting stock. And so he kind of said, all right, okay, well, if you're that bad at it, it's not like you can keep going. Like you've tried it 3 times and you've got complete different data. But at the end of that internship, I stayed on for a little bit, but at the end of that internship, I said, like, I think I might set up a business. I've been training and doing some things around kind of coaching and stuff. and around a couple of other holistic things. And he actually sat me down and helped me do my first ever business plan, and said, sorry to see you go, whatever. Like, very lovely, one of the best people I've ever worked for. But helped me kind of, I was like, where do I apply for this business thing? How do I how do I set it up? And he sat down and did it with me. And at the time I had no clue where I was going. I just knew that I did some stuff better than other stuff, and I'd kind of spent the time. But because he was willing to see my growth beyond what would benefit him, which doesn't always happen. And I know loads of leaders who say, like, our job is to make you better, even if that brings you somewhere else. But that means, like, 12 years later, I would say I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, doing work that I love doing, writing the books that I'm writing, doing, working with amazing leaders. But it's because he saw that there was an opportunity for me to progress, even though within the organization there wasn't, because it's a small organization, product-based business, and but there wasn't really much room. There was some room for a salesperson, of which I'm not good at, so, like, don't ever put me in sales. And he did a lot of other pieces of work as well, so it was quite a small. There was a couple of other people came and went, but him helping me set that up, even though he knew he was now going to lose, something that he'd spent a couple of years developing, and I understood the business and I could do things that didn't require as much oversight or effort or help, was a game changer for me to realize what I think good leadership looks like. And I think it is seeing the person, and while this is a good fit for them, that's great. But when it's not a good fit, and I know this from working with organizations, having people stuck in roles because they don't have other choices breeds the worst kind of set of circumstances in terms of performance and, like, a positive culture. And we see that organizations often have to, get people stuck. They won't get the same money elsewhere, so they don't have to replace the person. But it does have a really big impact on how people feel and are motivated and kind of engage with their work and stuff.
And I think motivation, like, if you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, and there's no end to it, even if you're happy with what you're doing, eventually you don't do. Innovation happens when you're at that point where you're just a bit uncomfortable. You're out of your comfort zone, and either it's you innovate or you change. And I think that finding that balance within you and within your team is really important, because the way I see it is we don't have a lot of staff rotation. We try and make the place a good place to work, but I don't want to be stuck with the same team forever, because that just breeds staleness in the business. I think new people bring new ideas, and I think I'm going to be very happy to see these two youngings go off to do amazing things. And who knows, in 10 years time they might come back in a completely different role, or they might come back as consultants. You never know, providing that safe space to, I think also it gives, there's this rapport, and then people become, because they know you have their best interest at heart. I think you get more out of everybody. I think some of our ideas and our best initiatives have been when we're all sitting around the table going, okay, how was your day? How's been your month? Are you finding anything difficult, or why do we make a mistake? We do sort of like wakes after, major mistakes, because we all have them, we all make them. And I think having that kind of open door and being aware that you're there, you're a little bit of a mentor, but you're also, I like to see us as a step for them to move up, or, whether within the organization or outside. And when your business is small, you cannot always provide steps up. I had a very recent conversation with a team member, and I was like, there's nowhere up for you to go, but we're happy to see you develop, and we think you should develop. And we're here to help you, either find the next place to go or support you in whatever you need training on, so that you can find that place that you're amazing for somewhere else. And I think that creates commitment within the team as well.
And I think in terms of, like, I'm thinking about kind of contracts, new opportunities, when your team feels that their best interests are at heart and they're thinking about the best interests of the business, they're also going to be discussing the business, interacting with potential clients in a way that is more relational than transactional. And so you're getting this, like, this way of being that people now associate with your business, even though it might be a product you're selling. The person you bought the product off, you're remembering those feelings and that kind of sense that you were important because the staff feel important. And I think that can get missed sometimes. Like I know if I talk in hospital settings, let's say, the focus is always on patient care, very important. Or in schools, it's on student well-being, very important. However, if the people providing it aren't having their needs met, we see that the way they meet other people's needs is also not very effective, or not as, like, good or helpful. So I think there's a little bit about understanding that our employees are actually kind of living, breathing role, like, expressions of our business. And I think that way of thinking about it can be really helpful, because it's not just their motivation, then they're going to be more attuned to other people's motivations, and that sense of kind of win-win rather than transactional give and take.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think maybe, I don't know, people in the food industry, we understand that, you could be putting the most amazing 3 Michelin star dish on the table, but if everything around it will be 2 Michelin star, if it would be anything around it doesn't work well, if you didn't get an experience, you just got an amazing bowl of whatever, right? But everything around it was crap. If the server was cranky, or if the chef was shouting in the kitchen, or we all understand that eating is an experience, and if you do not provide an experience, that third star will never come, right? So it's consistency, quality, and the environment that you're eating, it has to be right. And I think the same goes for retail. When you walk into a space and you get someone that's really cranky, doesn't want to be there, like they're checking up the phone, and they don't greet you with a smile, they're chatty, you kind of, that vibe gets transferred to the customer. That's straight into your profit and loss, right? Straight into the bank account. If you have staff that's motivated, that's happy, that they enjoy what they're doing, and they know it's meaningful for them as much as it's meaningful for the business, I think that reflects on your take-ins, on your sales for the business. And I think, anyone who runs in the hospitality industry, that's like most important pillars of, you have to, everybody has to kind of work towards these, experience that you need to provide for the customer. And I think if you have someone in a leadership role that doesn't reflect your brand and your, doesn't motivate, that doesn't inspire people, then it all works from the top all the way down to the bottom. So a little bit, I do agree with my dad a little bit that you have to lead by example, but that example has to be a holistic one, in my opinion. You have to consider everything, the environment they're working in, their opportunities they get, the money they get. Flexibility is really important as well. If flexibility is a currency. Happiness in work is really important. I spent more time at Picado than I spent at home, right? So if that was a crappy environment, if I didn't want to go you know, and I own the place. Imagine what I would expect. I couldn't expect my staff to be happy, or
Mm,
if they're walking into somewhere, you know, with a really bad vibe.
mm, mm. It's really funny because I worked in kitchens for quite a bit, and there was always the head chef that could berate you during service, but the minute service was done, the berating stopped. So the only time you got the, what is commercialized on TV a lot, that kind of thing, was during maybe a 90-minute window. But every single, and I often think about this in terms of leadership, every single window outside of that was deeply respectful. And even during that, there was an understanding that this was about the best service. It wasn't about you or him. There's two head chefs I'm thinking about, but we also had this thing that I started to notice, which was, because you work odd hours, and there isn't very, like, if you're a chef you can be call me then a sous, chef de part, and then you can be head chef. But in kitchens there isn't a lot of place to go, but what there is relationships. So a lot of the time chefs spend a lot of time with other chefs from their industry or from other jobs. Waiting staff do the same. There can be this kind of crossover. But even in high pressure environments, when a leader gets that right, and in this case the head chef, everything is different, even if we're doing physically the same thing. So I remember once I was put in charge of not actually of cleaning, I was put in charge of ensuring that the team cleaned the kitchen. And I pulled out my phone when I was doing this. And so anyway, the team reported me to the head chef because they were like, we weren't meant to have phones in the kitchen. Fair enough, like we weren't. And I was in charge, and he didn't believe I should be, because I wasn't one of the senior chefs. But I had been working there a long time. And the head chef pulled me in the next day in front of the whole team and said, did you have your phone out? Now, like, we're all adults. It's a very weird thing to have done. He pulled me in front of everyone and said, did you have your phone out at whatever time? And I said, yeah, I did. I couldn't do anything until the cleaning was done, so whatever. And I wasn't meant to do the cleaning. I was meant to delegate. And he said, well, we have a no phone rule. And so I can't remember what he gave me. It was a verbal warning. I think the only verbal warning I've ever received. And then everyone left and said, Sheila, stay back. And I was like, what is this? Like, you have to give an action about a ridiculous thing. Because he'd be on, like, we all had our phones on us. We just didn't get caught on our phones. And he said, in that moment, you were the boss and you were on the phone. And I was the only female in this kitchen as well. And I was younger, by at least 10 years of everyone else. And he said, you're the youngest, you're female, and you were put in charge, and you gave them something they could complain about. That's why you're being reprimanded, because you didn't observe what they were seeing. And what they were seeing was a younger female giving them work and on her phone, and what they were meant to be seeing was the person in charge. And he said, don't leave that go. And it's like, it was and I'm sure he wouldn't even remember saying this to me, but it's a really subtle thing that I walked away and I was like, oh, the issue wasn't my phone. The issue was that I gave them something they could complain about that was reasonable. And as the person in charge in that moment, my job, even though I was stepping in, I was covering the head chef, my job in that moment was to take up that authority and respect it in the way that it needs to be respected. And when I didn't, well, first of all, they had something on me, and second of all, then I had a big lesson. But it was a really interesting moment, because I hadn't really, I just thought, you're cleaning the kitchen, we all pull out our phones on the sideline. But in that moment, I didn't cop, well, they're not keen on you being in charge in this moment. And you're not really reading what you're meant to be doing in this situation. You're just kind of letting it happen.
And kitchens are notorious for horrific cultures. I love to, and I think also that's probably why I was adamant from the beginning that I didn't want an environment, even though we're high pressure as well. When we service and when we do classes, we're down to schedules, and it's like a little ballet, because my space is really tight. So everything has to happen at the correct times. And sometimes we don't have time to take breaks and we're tired. But we always make sure that, I think I'm adamant that kitchen culture needs to change. But we have a lovely neighbor, and I, every time I have a chance, I like to praise them. In Portobello, the Richmond restaurant right next door, and I remember the first time I went, the kitchen is, you can see the kitchen. It's not fully open, but you can see it when you're sitting down. And I was so impressed that there was no shouting. There was
mm,
this kind of calmness. There wasn't any, you couldn't see them. You could see them. They were working under pressure, but there wasn't any, um, it was very clearly a lovely run kitchen, mostly men. And I think it was the first time in a long time that I had seen a kitchen where nobody was abusing anyone.
mm, mm,
I think I'm very glad to see all that, you know, horrible kitchen culture changing.
mm,
But they've been a huge inspiration for me, because we also have an open kitchen. So when you come to a class or to a supper club, when we do service, we're on display and you're under
mm,
pressure, but you're chatting with the diners and everything. So when mistakes are made, you just put up your hands and go oops, and laugh them off and
mm,
learn from them. But if you crumble as the leader, as the head chef, if you crumble and you start shouting and screaming and cursing, it's a terrible look, but it's also a terrible environment for everyone else, for the diners
mm,
and for the people working with you.
mm,
So that's, I think I'm glad to see all of that slowly fading. It's not, I mean, there's a lot of kitchens that are still run like that, but
mm,
um, for us, that's part of the whole holistic approach.
mm,
You
mm,
want the team to be happy and to be motivated. I want to be happy and motivated. I don't want to
mm,
turn up to a place where nobody can stand each other, or that we have free passes to berate each other for the time where during the service, and then we drink ourselves stupid to forget how horrible the evening was. So none of that can happen if you want to run a good kitchen, I think.
mm,
uh,
mm. That's really interesting because, and I do think the open kitchen kind of culture has started to shift that because now you're on display. Like I remember when we used to, if you, I kind of have a belief that your leadership doesn't adapt when different people are in the room, in the sense that if you're being, if like in a kitchen, if HACCP are there, or if somebody's reviewing it in organizations, if someone more senior is there, your leadership should look pretty similar because you're leading in a way that can be on display. If
mm,
we're overly, putting things away, hiding things, taking things off the table to be discussed, then we know that something in our way of leading is not working because we're now doing a lot of image management. So I do think that the open kitchen culture has shifted that a little bit because diners, I remember I used to, like, I was working in kitchens very young. I used to go home and think, like, if my dad
what am I
heard the words I learned or the things that were said to me, or like, it was just, and you just, like, I would have just learned to be like, well, I don't want to be distracted by that. I have to continue. But diners would not enjoy their dinner. That's what, you know what I mean? If they heard the things that we had heard in the kitchen. So I do think that there's something about that transparent culture that does actually help us take some accountability for it. Because often you'd get, and now I have to say the two head chefs I'm thinking about, gentlemen, absolutely, like, excellent at what they do, had a really strong grip around the culture. You're allowed to have a bit of crack, but there was lines, and if they heard about those lines being crossed, that it was addressed really effectively. But one of the things that was often interesting is when they weren't there, because there was a culture of not saying it, like not making the complaint, not naming what had happened. And so there's a lot to be said for that kind of that transparent way of working. Go on.
No, I was going to say, and we still have a long way to go,
Mm,
when it comes to chefs and kitchens, to get to a space where, to get to a point where all of these things are eradicated. But like, when you're at the top, you're leading and you're creating the culture of your organization, and it's really important. Above all, when you have like a very diverse team,
mm,
I'm possibly it's possibly easier for me because I'm an immigrant, and I'm familiar with, I've been living here for like 24 years, so I'm very familiar with, I'm very Irish in some respects now after so many years. but handling different nationalities as well, and different levels of English, and different customs culturally. You know, how you talk to people, and how even like reporting issues is very different, you know, from culture to culture. So it's establishing an environment where people feel comfortable coming to you, and you know, and that they feel ownership for the business as well. I think that's, you know, in family run businesses, well, I saw it in with my own family, you know. You run the risk of running a dictatorship. My dad definitely ran a dictatorship. So it was his way or the highway. And that's very frustrating, right? So understanding that, yes, you're responsible for the business. And at the end of the day, you're the one stamping on decisions, and, you know, making sure that they happen. It's also really important to get people in and include them in the decision making, because then you take everyone in with you, and the ownership of the business and the responsibilities now are spread between the team. And I think people respond really well to that. Really well, really well. We've, as I said, some of the best things we do at Picado have not definitely come from me. They've come from the team. And ideas to improve profitability or productivity. Definitely improving productivity it's all down to the team, because if I'm not there, if you're not doing that particular job day in and day out, it's very difficult for you as the head to spot what's wrong or suggest any changes, while the person who's there doing the job is exactly the person who should be telling you what we can change or we can move to improve the process or make it better. And I think maybe culturally, in a lot of places, you go in and, you know, the boss tells you what to do, and they don't care. And they're not aware. And well, in very big teams, in very big businesses, that happens a lot. You know, the boss is making decisions, but the head's not connected to. I don't know where I read recently. It was really interesting article, and it was about, you know, this company that had gotten rid of meetings altogether. So
I've heard of some attempts at that.
Yeah, so what they had done was they found that they were having the top management of the company was having meetings with middle management, and they were making decisions that affected, you know, the everyday worker at you know, at the bottom, the ones that were doing the job basically. And like, they were making horrific mistakes and ridiculous stuff. And this consultant came in and said, listen, you know, far too many meetings with people who don't understand. So this is like Chinese whispers. So, you know, if you're going to have a meeting, you're going to have a meeting with everyone down, right, on that particular issue. So from the person, if you were having a meeting about, you know, the cleanliness of the space, it was going to be the CEO, the manager, and all the way down to the person who mopped the floor, because that was the one who really knew. And in a lot of the places, they got rid of completely of middle management, and they found out that the productivity of the place improved greatly. And I think it's just getting everybody involved in the decision making created a far better culture for the business.
So just two things in that, because I'm aware of the time, so we will have to wrap up. This is really interesting. The two things, one is that's like similar to the Ford model. So Ford said that if something was going wrong with the cars, he didn't talk to everyone. He had to go onto the factory floor and find out what was going wrong there, because that's the point at where the knowledge was actually being kept. And so I really like that. But also what you're saying has elements of inclusive leadership wrapped into it, because inclusive leadership, often people think it's just about the identity of people. Now, obviously, everybody needs to be included that is in your work environment in an effective way. But it's also about what we include and when. And if we aren't including people who have knowledge simply because they don't have the title that we think is required for the knowledge, then you already have the structure in your organization where somebody has that knowledge and they're in the organization. You just haven't created a method for that knowledge to be accurately transferred. And that's where I think inclusive leadership is quite helpful for what we're talking about, in terms of, if I want to solve a problem, it's not just about loads of different opinions. It's about including the knowledge and the information and the insight that might be traditionally overlooked, that could actually result in more innovation, better productivity. And we know the research keeps saying it. So I really like that idea of actually speaking to the people who see the problem. And I just think about, like, I spoke to someone at one point and they had a factory line and there was an issue with like a conveyor belt. And so they got an engineer to fix the conveyor belt. And then there was a complaint that there was another issue. And so there was another issue. And then they went down and they said, why do we have these two issues and we had none before? And somebody said, well, the person who managed this part of the conveyor belt put this thing there. It was like a sponge or something. It wasn't meant to be there. Put this thing there and none of these problems happened. And it's just, nobody asked why the problem didn't happen before and now it does. And the thing was, that person was moved to a new position and the new person didn't know about the sponge. And like, it was the simplest, it was like not even a Euro sponge. It was this random sponge that was placed in, and they had paid 2 engineers and like manufacturing experts to come in and fix this problem. And this person used a sponge and the problem didn't exist for a number of years because of this sponge that was completely compliant. So I like that idea of kind of realizing that sometimes we overlook because we're not asking the right people. So yes, it's about including everyone and everyone's identity, but also it's about ensuring that you're including the relevant insights at the relevant points, and not just having meeting after meeting without the required data, because you're used to a particular style of working together. So I really love that, Lily. I'm going to have to let you go because we had said a half an hour. I'm not surprised that we went 40 minutes. We did have comments, so I just want to read the 2 comments because I don't know if you can see them. So Orla Kelly had said, I think this was earlier on in our discussion, when I'm in the right energy, the rest of the day goes really well. So just that idea that if I'm holding it, then I'm going to be more effective in my leadership and influence. And then Beatrice has said, what Sheila's saying reminds me of saying you can't pour from an empty cup. When I was saying, if your staff don't have, if they're not being treated with respect, how can you expect them to talk about your business with respect? So I just thought they were 2 kind of nice comments. So thank you. Tell us where we can go to get hold of your classes, because they sound really interesting, and also I want to go into one of your supper clubs. So tell us how we can get hold of that.
So you just go into the website. It's all there. We launched a new website about 3 weeks ago, so we're still kind of dealing with tiny little glitches, but all the information is there. We do classes every week, and then we do supper clubs once a month. So it's kind of my way of reminding myself why I cannot have a restaurant. I feed people. It's a 12 seater. It's a long table, 12 seats, and changes every month, whatever I feel like. It's a secret menu. So the night before, we design the menu based on the restrictions of the group. And then you get emailed the menu the night before with suggestions for beer and wine pairing. And you come and have some amazing Mexican food.
Oh, I love it. What's the website address so that we know where to go?
ShadowMexican.com.
Excellent. Love it. Thank you so much, Leah. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to be booking out one of the summer clubs.
And congratulations on the book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.